With how varied this NHL draft class can be, it is ripe for some massive draft day trades. And as it's been reported by people like Elliotte Friedman, we are going to get a lot more activity in this year's draft, which leads to a lot of speculation and, of course, a lot of mock trades. And over on the community tab, I asked you guys to drop your biggest mock trades for the 2025 NHL draft, whether that be prospect, pick, or player related. So today we're going to be going through the most interesting of those mock trades and seeing what could potentially happen on draft day. So make sure you watch till the end as we react to some of your mock trades here, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey prospect content just like this, because you already know we're going to be cranking up the videos as the draft comes closer. Now, the most upvoted comment of the bunch comes from Wesley Larks, proposing a Bowen Byram trade, where the Sabres would trade Bowen Byram with an extension in place to the San Jose Sharks for picks number 30 and picks number 33. Now, this would be quite a bit interesting, because if we don't see any other action involving San Jose, like potentially trading up to secure a Matthew Schaefer, potentially trading for a younger left shot D could be a pretty interesting way to go about it. You, of course, already got Sam Dickinson, Luka Castaglione there as left shot D, but Bowen Byram, of course, as the oldest there, could immediately step into the lineup this next season for San Jose and give them some offensive talent to work with. Now, personally, I haven't really been the biggest fan of Bowen Byram recently, just because the inconsistencies and the injuries against him, but there is still offensive talent to unlock here with the puck moving ability, with the skating, and how he's able to use those things in conjunction. We'll see how it's able to translate if he goes to a team like San Jose, but with that young core around him, I think he could do quite well. And again, I think the most important thing is that as the players like Castaglione and Sam Dickinson are getting more ice time, a player like Byram can put some of that responsibility off their shoulders, at least hopefully. Plus, in terms of the age bracket, he fits their timeline pretty well, turning 24 this June, so it's not that big of an issue, at least long term. So I think for San Jose, especially with their current rebuild, he'd fit pretty well into their future. Now, for somebody like Byram, who's 23 and just scored 38 points, even though he has his issues, he still is going to have a decent amount of value out there, which is why, of course, you're giving up the 30 and 33rd overall pick. Now, I'll say this, in the Sharks case, I think at least one of those picks, 100% would be spent on a young defenseman. If it's a player like a Blake Vidler available somehow, or something like a Cameron Reed, a Henry Brustovich, somebody up that alley, it would be used likely on a defenseman, maybe even both of those picks being used on Ds. So if they were to package both of them for a more NHL ready defender who still fits their timeline well, I could see that. If I'm the Sharks, I think the value makes sense. I would see an NHL player, though, going back to the Buffalo Sabres. I would be shocked, in all honesty, to see the Sabres move Byram for just a couple of picks in this stage of the rebuild, unless their cheapness really gets the best of them. Overall, I would say it makes a lot more sense for the Sharks than it does the Sabres, but I still think there's a good base to build on here and a good trade that could end up happening. Our next mock trade comes from Wheel of Time 1010, actually involving Bowen Byram as well, but this time involving the Calgary Flames, with the Flames getting the 9th overall pick and Bowen Byram. In exchange, the Sabres gives Rasmus Andersson and defensive prospect Henry Muse. Now, what's interesting about this is that the Sabres get two right-shot defensemen in this deal in both Rasmus Andersson and Henry Muse. I'm a little bit concerned about the Sabres trading for Andersson, especially since he is a pending UFA, so maybe there's a deal that has to come into place where Andersson signs a contract extension with Buffalo, perhaps. I don't quite see the Sabres taking a big risk, especially since they know how undesirable of a market they truly are, but I think Andersson would be a solid fit in Buffalo. If for nothing else, the passion he brings for the game and his teammates, I think, is something that Buffalo needs desperately so much more of, and I think could be pretty boosted by Andersson's presence there. He is more of an offensive D, which I don't quite see fitting truly into Buffalo's system, but I think he'll be better than really anybody else on that right side. Plus, you got Henry Muse, who, if he's able to jumpstart that anticipation, get a little bit more quick to the NHL game, I think could become a decent bottom pair right shot D. So I think there's a lot to work off there. Plus, if Calgary wants to go in a younger direction, you get Bowen Byram plus the 9th overall pick, which on top of the pick they already have is going to be pretty interesting for their first round. Jumping into the top 10 would certainly be a big boost, though, and maybe they could package that for something else. I think for the Flames to give up Andersson at this rate, it has to be a pretty massive package back, but I think 9th overall and a player like Byram could be enough to do it. Maybe the Flames are a little bit stingy about giving up on Henry Muse this early, but honestly, 9th overall, a player like Byram, I think that's a pretty decent haul to get back, especially for the Flames team that I think could use some more top-end picks. Getting one right here would be, I think, pretty ideal. So I would say I actually like this from the Flames perspective a little bit more than the Sabres, because I just don't know how much Anderson's going to be a true needle mover for them on the ice, but I think off the ice it could be pretty valuable, and if anything gets them to the playoffs at this point, you'll trade anything possible to get there. Now, going on to two different teams here, we go on to a trade between the Islanders and the Minnesota Wild from BRAF, saying the Islanders receive Marco Rossi and sign him to a large long-term extension, I would assume. And in exchange, Minnesota receives Colorado's 2026 first, which they got in the big Cal Ritchie, Brock Nelson deal, and Jean-Gabriel Pageau. Now, this deal I actually find very interesting because I think it would be incredible for the Islanders to go after a player like Marco Rossi in the first place. It's the exact type of players they should be trying to bring onto that roster. Somebody that seems like just has become an outcast in Minnesota's system, but I don't really think for many critical reasons. I mean, he's somebody that has just gotten better every single year when he's been in Minnesota, and even though he wasn't amazing in the playoffs and got limited ice time, in that limited ice time, he still got 2 goals, 3 points in 6 games, which was still one of the better producing players on Minnesota in the playoffs. So I think for Rossi, especially at his age, there's a lot to build on, a lot to grow with, and in that Islanders system that has so much opportunity to give, why not give a player like him a chance? But for a team like Mini that, again, feels like they've given up on a player like Rossi, I feel like Jean-Gabriel Pageau is the exact type of player they're gonna be going after. I mean, it seemed like Brock Nelson was gonna be a player they wanted to go after in free agency, but of course, with him re-signing in Colorado, that makes the center options out there a lot more limited. So you got a player like Pageau who isn't particularly exciting, but of course has a lot of playoff experience and success in those playoffs, and of course can play down the middle very effectively in a two-way role, which, let's be honest, is what Minnesota loves to have. But I love this really just for Marco Rossi's career. And sure, he won't have the elite wing options he had in Minnesota when you had the opportunity to play with players like Kirill Kaprizov, for example. But I think just having a team that actually believes in it again will give him some pretty big confidence. And you can immediately place him as that second line center below Bo Horvat, but ahead of Casey Cizikas, and I think get some pretty big results. And pretty much for the Wild as well, you could put Pageau in a similar position. Not as the fourth line center, definitely above a player like Gaudreau, but as that third line center, the defensive responsibilities there, I could pretty easily see Minnesota really gravitating towards that and wanting to have Pageau for that long-term spot. And even though he's on the much older side, I think that's something that Minnesota will actually be looking towards, especially as a replacement for Rossi. I think they want to get more experienced, and Pageau absolutely does that for them. So honestly, I think this is a pretty good mock trade. Maybe the Islanders have to give up slightly more than this, but maybe not by that much, maybe by a couple of picks. So I don't think it's a huge deal. Overall, though, I like this package quite a bit. Let's move on to the next mock trade today, and this one comes from Connor McCaulfield, 4843, saying Noah Dobson will get traded to the Utah Mammoth in exchange for the 4th overall pick and Michael Kesselring. Now, Dobson going to the Mammoth is something that I've seen quite a bit this offseason, but I think it does make sense in terms of Utah wanting that premier puck mover, somebody that is on a different level than even a Mikhail Sergachev or a Sean Durzi. But I do think for Utah, if I want to see them trade for another right shot defenseman, I want to see them going after just a defensive stalwart. I do think they're fine with the puck movers they have already on the defense. Plus, you consider the asking price. You give up one of your only defensive defensemen in Michael Kesselring, who I might add is one of the most underrated pieces out there. I think would be an excellent New York Islander, but it's somebody that's put up some pretty good offensive numbers too. 29 points in 82 games this last year. He's not inept offensively either. So I think for Utah, the value that Kesselring brings is really immense. Plus, you give up the 4th overall pick, and I think in this scenario, honestly, I think Utah says no. I think they'd want to get a player like Dobson, but I think it would be, if it's going to have a Kesselring attached to it, like a 3rd round pick or something at the most. I don't think you're going to get 4th overall and Kesselring in a Dobson deal. Maybe 4th overall is the only thing going back, but honestly, I think Utah might want to shoot for even bigger stars if they trade a top 5 pick, which again, rarely happens. Maybe if Dobson was slightly better defensively than he is now, I could see Utah being a lot more interested, but I feel like with how many gargantuan mistakes he makes every now and again, that might scare Utah off a little bit. But of course, with the big size, the big point totals that Dobson has put up in the past, maybe they end up going for it. But I definitely see that being more of a later offseason deal if it were to happen. Now, for our next mock trade, we got an absolute whopper here involving the 1st overall pick from Robin Mahfood, going for a big one here between the Blackhawks and the Islanders, saying the Blackhawks will trade 3rd overall plus Kevin Korchinski to the Islanders for the 1st overall pick. The Hawks get Bedard as running mate in Misa for the next decade. Hawks have a logjam of D prospects, and the emergence of Renzel has made Korchinski a valuable trade asset. New York Islanders get the hometown boy, Eisman, his buddy, and the best playmaker in the draft in Higgins, and a potential replacement quarterback for their power play, making Dobson Robertson more expendable, leaving the Sharks to pick Schaefer. Everyone gets what they want. Now, honestly, I can absolutely see where you're coming from here in terms of the teams and what they could potentially want. I think for all teams involved, if the value is the same, let's say, Schaefer going to San Jose, Misa going to Chicago, and the Islanders ending up with James Higgins, I think that would be pretty much perfect fits for all three teams involved. But of course, doesn't quite work that way in reality most of the time, especially for a team like the Islanders trading that first overall pick to go down to 3, even though I don't think they would mind ending up with James Higgins whatsoever. I think to trade that type of pick, to trade up the value in a player like Schaefer for them, it would have to cost even more than Kevin Korchinski, at least to me. And that might be surprising to some, but again, I think a player like Korchinski and his stock has fallen quite a bit. I don't think really he ever should have been drafted 7th overall, but I still think there's the opportunity here to be a solid power play quarterback, as it was mentioned, and bring in some good offensive opportunities. But compared to a player like Matthew Schaefer, there's a pretty big night and day difference between the two. And yes, the Islanders would be recouping some value to a player like Korchinski, but I think you're probably going to have to include a couple of picks, maybe an NHL player on top of it, to make it worth the Islanders' while. Because I think even though they'd love a James Higgins, it would be a great marketable move. I think in terms of the value, you need a little bit more than that. In fact, I'd go on to say it might be a little bit more likely that Chicago trades up to 2nd overall with San Jose to potentially get Michael Misa at number 2 overall. And we've heard some whispers recently about how San Jose really likes Caleb Denoye as well, but you got other options around that range if they were to go down to number 3, like James Higgins, of course, Parter Martone, even Anton Frindell could be potentially in the mix. So if San Jose is pretty balanced after Matthew Schaefer, if they have 2 to 5, let's say, as basically the exact same tier, I could easily see San Jose being fine with adding a player like Kevin Korchinski, for example, if they know they're not going to get Matthew Schaefer, adding a top tier offensive lefty and a pretty decent one at 20 years old. To me, I think that's way more likely than what we could potentially see with a 3rd to 1st overall type of swap, because that to me just rarely happens, and I think the value would be honestly too much for Chicago to handle. But I think going to 3 to 2nd makes a lot more sense, and I think there's an opportunity where Chicago just trades Kevin Korchinski by himself for that 2nd overall pick, and that could potentially be all you need. I will agree, though. I think for Chicago, I am doing everything possible to get Michael Misa because I think he is destined and perfect for that Chicago team. Yes, they would take somebody else. They'd take a Parter Martone or a Denoye or a Frindell, whatever it comes to that. But there is, in my opinion, a clear tier ahead between those players and a Michael Misa. And especially what Chicago needs, bigger forwards, bigger centermen, responsible players, guys that can drive their own lines. Michael Misa is that, and pretty much perfect, I think, for that Blackhawks forward group. Now, this next one is a whopper of a deal coming from Brandon Plays 3942, saying Jason Robertson to the New Jersey Devils to play with 86 and 63's left wing. Dallas gets right D Dougie Hamilton, a 2026 first round pick, and either Simone Nemec or Seamus Casey, both being, of course, right D prospects. Now, this would certainly be pretty mind-blowing to say the least. I mean, Jason Robertson going to the Devils, I think would be a great fit for him stylistically. You got players like Jack Hughes, Jesper Bratt, has been mentioned, to bring the speed and the intensity, but a player like Robertson as the great finisher, the great hockey mind, coming into that forward group, I think he'd do exceptionally well there. Interestingly, you have the players coming back to the Stars. I mean, to me, I don't think they care about a first round pick whatsoever in the deal, but a player like Dougie Hamilton might tickle their fancy maybe. Of course, big size, but as the offensive D there, he's had his ups and downs in New Jersey, ups and downs in terms of the health, and there's been some frustrating moments, so I'm not sure for the Stars if Hamilton is a complete fit, but would certainly be able to log minutes pretty efficiently when healthy at least, and I mean, compared to some of the other right defensive options, I guess I'll take it. I will say I would be surprised to see the Stars also going for a younger right defenseman like a Seamus Casey or Simone Nemec. I mean, you just had the Nils Lundqvist experiment that just has not worked, and it feels like for the Stars, their experimentation around smaller offensive D is, I think, over at this point. I mean, Simone Nemec, Casey, they're not the biggest players in the world. They don't really play like it, and I think that might scare the Stars off a little bit at least. Having a bigger body like Dougie Hamilton helps a little bit. And the age, I think, also lines up with the Stars pretty well. So maybe that's a possibility, but I think it's more likely that maybe if it's a Casey or a Mets and picks, they would package that for another right D to trade on top of Hamilton in the future, possibly. I will say, I think I love this deal for Jason Robertson specifically, but I'll say for the Devils as well. If you're trading both Hamilton and a Casey or a Mets, I mean, the defense is looking pretty thin at that point. Obviously, you could go after some more players, but I think you'd be risking some big defensive deficiencies, especially in the size department. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But I think especially for New Jersey, it's risky. For the Stars, it's risky. So, I mean, crazier things have happened, but I don't quite see it perfectly yet. Another big one here involving the Montreal Canadiens and Anaheim Ducks and a couple of mid-first round picks from DroopXX917 saying to McTavish to Montreal for 16th overall, 17th overall, and Logan Mailloux, saying that Montreal needs a 2C, young and talented player that didn't get along well with Cronin. I know he's gone, but maybe he's still unhappy. Anaheim, I feel, gets a solid return for a guy of McTavish's skill, 2 middle first round picks, and a potential top 4 defenseman with a good shot. Now, this one is pretty interesting to me, so let's break it down here. From the Montreal Canadiens perspective, I mean, this is a no-brainer to me personally. Logan Mailloux has his ups, but he has his serious downs, and I still think has a long ways to go in the defensive play to be a complete NHLer and to be somebody that, quite frankly, even gets trusted by NHL coaches. So I think he's somebody that Montreal definitely could view as expendable, and we've already heard confirmation of that. But that's why I think it's a little bit suspect from the Anaheim Ducks side. Sure, I think they would prefer a right-shot D, but I think if they're going to trade for any defenseman, they're going to want to trade for somebody much more established, especially defensively. They have so many puck movers coming up, so many younger guys that they can play. I just don't think they're going to be very comfortable going for a guy like Mailloux that has his major deficiencies. The shot is a big aspect that I think the Ducks would look for in a defenseman, but outside of that, I just don't quite see it fitting. Plus, I think for Anaheim at this stage in their rebuild, they don't care about 16th and 17th overall picks. It would be nice, it would be great to have, but I think they'd rather trade that for a better defenseman and perhaps somebody else in somewhere else, somewhere of a different capacity. But then you talk about Mason McTavish, and I think out of really anybody in Anaheim's core, I think McTavish is one of the players they would trade last. I mean, you're looking at players like Zegras, especially, that would be ahead of him in the trade department, because I think especially what Anaheim prioritizes, what they want in their younger players, McTavish is everything and encapsulates that all. The physical intensity, the absolute dog in a bone mentality. He just has so much that I think Anaheim loves, and even though there was some bad moments there, I think that's going to get alleviated pretty quick. And with how much I think Anaheim's top brass really loves a guy like McTavish, I just don't see them trading him, especially not for a pick and prospect package. But absolutely, if they were to find a deal and make something happen, I think it would be perfect for Montreal and exactly what they need in that second line center spot. But everybody's now looking for that next Sam Bennett. McTavish is honestly one of the players that fits that role the best in the NHL, especially among younger players. So I think for Montreal, it would take a lot more to make a trade happen. Maybe if the contract negotiations go awry and there's some complications there, maybe Montreal could swoop in, but I just don't see it as all too likely. Now let's go into the last mock trade to talk about here from the GOAT and channel member eLiaminator 2313 with a big trade involving both the Ottawa Senators and the Buffalo Sabres. Going to the Senators, they will receive JJ Peterka, and the Sabres will receive a big package here. Drake Batherson, Lassie Thompson, Tyler Boucher, not much value with Boucher and Thompson, but could still have some potential in lock, and the 2025 Senators first round pick at 21st overall. As for the explanation, the Sabres don't seem that intrigued to keep Peterka for some strange reason. Maybe he doesn't want to stay in Buffalo long term, but Ottawa connects Stützle and Peterka up again. They were electric at the World Juniors, and Peterka fits exactly what the Sens need. Someone that can put the puck in the back of the net on that top line alongside Tkachuk and Stützle. For Buffalo, they get Batherson, still a young right wing on a good contract, saves them money, which I'm sure the owners will love. A couple of younger first round picks, reclamation projects, again, not too much value put on either, but you never know, and they could become something, and obviously that 21st overall pick in this year's draft, which they can use to flip for another asset. Also, Batherson and Norris had good chemistry in Ottawa, and reuniting them could help morale in the Buffalo locker room a bit, as I know those two were staples in the Ottawa locker room. Now, this is another one where I think you're on the right track, and I think there's potential for a deal to happen. For one, having Stützle and Peterka together would be unbelievable. I would pay so much to see those guys on a full line throughout the course of an NHL season, just absolutely dogging out there, just doing so much fun, and Peterka and Stützle would be a blast to see back together. In terms of what the Sabres get back, I do believe that Batherson would actually be a really interesting asset for them. Their right wing depth is a little bit suspect as of right now. Of course, when you trade Peterka on the left wing side, it gets a little bit worse. But in Batterson's case, the speed, especially with how much Buffalo prioritized speedy, bigger players in last year's offseason, Batterson could be that type of guy. Doesn't really play that big, but in terms of the speed, does have that to show for himself. And of course, the point production has still been pretty great. The playmaking has been superb. And like you said, the chemistry between him and Norris could be good to reunite. And like was also mentioned, he's on an absolute steal of a contract right now at 4.975, which I think for Buffalo at this point, with how much they could be paying Peterka, likely at least $2 million more than that, I think is something they might want to look towards. The big thing though is the situation after that, because I do think Batterson, that first round pick, I think that's a good track to start on, but I do think the Senators would have to give up more than that. Likely a top prospect or somebody that can put in at least bottom 6 minutes in the NHL next year, or potentially could play on the right side of the defense. I mean, if you're going for maybe a prospect, you could go for like a Blake Montgomery, for example, a pretty good one, but I think you'd have to give up just a little bit more. Maybe they could use Blake Montgomery and that first round pick to trade it for a right D and make that happen. But again, I think it would cost a little bit more. From the Senators' perspective, I don't know if it's quite worth it to give up that much, but on the Sabres side, it seems like the expectations are high in a Peterka trade. At the end of the day, though, of all the drama surrounding his new contract, with him being an offer sheet eligible candidate, I think that's going to make the Sabres a really interesting team to watch this offseason. If things continue to stall out, the offer might become a little bit more palatable for a team like Ottawa. So we'll just have to wait and see. But I think a Batterson Peterka swap, there's definitely something there. But those are my reactions to your 2025 NHL mock trades. A lot of fun to sink our teeth into today, but thank you guys so much for tuning in. Also, if you submitted a question, thank you so much for doing so. They were so much fun to comb through and so much fun to talk about here today, so appreciate that a whole bunch. If you guys enjoyed the reactions here today, though, make sure that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. Comment down below your thoughts on all these mock trades, which ones you agree with, which ones you disagree with, and maybe your rebuttals, maybe your revised mock trades for some of these. Let me know your thoughts down below on those. And of course, make sure you share it with all the hockey fans you guys know online. Click on this card from my trade content, right one playlist, and I will see you in the next one, y'all. Have a fantastic hockey day. And goodbye.